Yeah, so I was wondering if you wanted to do some Platonic meditations before we start.
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Let me pull that up. Do you like music?
Sure.
Okay.
Or
right.
I'm flexible. I'm, you know.
Fair enough.
I bounce around a wide variety of different contexts.
Yeah. Do you not dislike music? Is probably the better question.
I do not dislike music.
Okay. All right. There we go. All right. Can you hear everything?
Okay, so take some time.
All right.
And do the centering practice. Remembering when you're centering, that your center extends down like a root into the ground, like a living root of a living tree. Make sure you have that sense of being centered and rooted. Now let's pay attention to the sense of touch, perhaps where your hands are touching you, your legs. Perhaps your thumbs are touching each other the way your hands are placed in your meditation. However, just find a place where you're touching. Notice that. Notice how the world is coming into you. You're going out into the world through your touch. The world is coming into you. You're going out to the world. You're realizing the world, but it's also realizing you. Now taste. Taste in your mouth. Again, notice what's going on there. There's an awareness going out. You're opening up to something, but it's also coming into you. You're realizing and being realized. Now you're hearing. Let yourself listen to the room around you, the little noises. Once again, notice you're going out into the world and it's coming into you. You are realizing and being realized in your hearing. Now your smell. You're breathing through your nose, smell. Same thing, awareness through smelling. Something coming into you, but you're also opening out into the world. Now sight. Probably all you're seeing is the inside of your eyelids. That's fine, look at it. You're still going out into something, and something is coming into your mind, into your awareness. Realizing and being realized. Now, And this will be a little bit chaotic, but that's all right. All of the senses at once: sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Realize what they all have in common. That coming in of the world and you going out into the world. Become aware of your awareness. The way you are realizing and being realized. Don't keep it just inside your head in introspection. Allow it to be also outside of you, imaginally. Both at the same time, in and out. An awareness of the inner world and an awareness of the outer world. Awareness of awareness. All at once. Feel deep into the core of your being. Feel out into the circumference of your room. Now let's pay attention to that awareness of awareness, the way you are realizing and being realized within and without. Notice there's a rhythm to it. This is physis. Maybe you can track it with your breath, each moment leading into the next. But it's not just in your breath, is it? It's also in your room. It's also in your mind. Moment to moment, continuity, like a rhythm. Moment to moment. Now imagine your body, but also imagine a couple in the imaginal sense. Feel your body and feel maybe a chair in your room, a table in your room, the floor in your room. In that rhythm of moment to moment, each one is unpacking itself, unfolding itself, realizing itself like a melody. One moment is a note, the next moment is another note, but they belong together. Unfolding in time, moment by moment. There's a melody for each and everything. This is Suke. But notice that all of these melodies, they all go together. They're all following the rhythm and they somehow all belong together. The way your chair is unfolding, the way your couch is unfolding, the way your body is unfolding, the way your floor is, they're all unique, but they all belong together as well. There's a harmony of how they're all unfolding. They each have an individual melody, but they have a shared harmony. They're all in a world together, including you, including the depths of your mind. Feel, again, the rhythm of physis, the melody of Suke, and now we're doing the harmony of noesis. There's that oneness of all of them. But notice there's a deeper oneness. The rhythm and the melodies and the harmony also are one. This is the musicality of your experience as it's unfolding. And like any good music, it's simultaneously within you and without you. It's within you and without you. You are realizing it and being realized by it. Moment by moment. Feel how that it's all one. Everything is oneing. Everything is oneing individually, but also together. Feel that process. The oneness as a process of the rhythm, of the melody, of the harmony. This is kenosis. Feel it. but it's not centered on you. This is the real self-realization of reality for its own sake. You don't perceive it so much as you participate in it. By participating in it, you can become aware of it. Participate in it as deeply as possible. It's not yours, but it's not absent from you either. You participate in it. The music within, the music without, you're participating in the self-realization of being itself. Notice how deep that is within you, your very being, but how deep that is without you, the very being of everything. Realize that process. Process is not a thing. It's not in a particular place. It's everywhere, like music, within and without. Now see if you can sense through the process. Do you have a sense of an underlying principle that's governing it all, regulating it all? There's a logos to it, a law to it. There's a principle. It's not a thing, it's not a process, it's the principle behind it all. Now we're moving into theosis. Any sense you have of that principle participates in the principle, but is not fully the principle. Take any sense you have of the principle of oneness, the ground of being, and appreciate it as a wonderful symbol, a precious portal. Thank you. But what's beyond it? And now maybe a deeper sense emerges. Thank you. I appreciate this. But what is beyond it? What is beyond it? Thank you. What is beyond it? Try to be as silent within and as still without, and as open between both of those as you possibly can. As you continue to open to what is beyond. Thank you. But what is beyond? Just as you did before, keep your eyes closed, because you're going to try and come out of this practice as slowly as possible. Trying to integrate what you cultivated in your practice with your everyday consciousness and cognition. Slowly come back. Try and integrate what you've realized and how you have been realized as you open your eyes.
So how was that?
It's good. I like John's meditations.
Yeah, it was from the Circling and Dialogos course that he and Guy taught like a month and a half ago now.
Okay. I mean, I took, I didn't, for about a month, I did, his meditations course that he offered. I did maybe 25 of those. I periodically just drop into that. I'm not a seasoned meditator. I don't do a lot of meditation, but I did that with John. I followed his course for about a month or so.
Yeah, I remember your Stoa wisdom energy talk, and you mentioning that. And I was listening to the series you're doing with him, and you were saying, I was a neo-Aristotelian, but now I'm flirting with Neoplatonism or something to that effect. So I was like, oh, maybe he'll want to do this.
I mean, I certainly, I love dropping into being like that. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I find it just, I'm trying to understand contemplative science and contemplation as opposed to meditation and visualization and some of those things. Have you ever read anything on contemplative science? I'm meeting with Arthur Versluis hopefully in a month or two when he's done with the book he's writing, and he has this awesome chapter in one of the books that John cites on Platonism as contemplative art and contemplative science, and how like the non-dual kind of metaphysics are very different from the subject-object science that we kind of inhabit right now.
I have not. I mean, I certainly know the literature, the mindfulness literature, broadly speaking, in psychotherapy kinds of things, but not specifically that particular slice. So no, I haven't heard that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'll read a paragraph. But just was looking at it right a minute ago. He says, at the heart, the Platonic tradition belongs to both art and science. From the very beginning, Plato's dialogues were artistic, theatrical, and literary, which I just didn't really appreciate. I thought they were just purely philosophical, and then conveying multiple meanings through parables and allusions. But there's another way of understanding this tradition, one that might seem at odds with artistic aspects of Platonism, but that is just as present. And I refer to Platonic mysticism as contemplative science. And he cites a lot earlier in the book how it tries to kind of honor the interiority of our being a little better than the subject-object distinction of, like you guys were talking about, this kind of correlational diagnostic model that we have that captures all of like the known bads, but doesn't really explain anything or honor a lot of the like intersubjective and intrasubjective elements of things.
Yeah, no, we need definitely a massive upgrade or to heal the split that modern empirical natural science brought upon us in regards to that. At least that's the way my frame is. And we didn't have those splits nearly before. There are good reasons why the epistemology of modern empirical natural science did that, and it afforded us some really powerful things. But it eliminated the psyche, the subjective ground, qualitative psyche in a particular kind of way. And we can recapture that with you talk. At least that's my frame of reference.
Yeah, I liked that you were and I'm losing my train of thought. You were talking with John and saying, I don't know, it just felt more existential than a lot of the kind of modern psychology. And even when Gary kind of brought up this psychotherapeutic stuff, like the Freudian stuff doesn't quite get at this much broader, again, I keep using the word existential, but this other mode that's really lost in the fray, so to speak.
Yeah, and this really came home to me, which is, certainly for me at least, the central edge of where I am in relationship to this particular series, is the very clear differentiation between psychology and psycheology.
Yeah, could you explain that or break that down a little bit?
Sure. So for me, psychology really, as what the word references for me, is the modern empirical institution. Okay? So the old term, psyche, which would relate to Aristotle, and there was psychology before the 19th century at one level. But for me, psychology as an institutional entity in Western society, most notably American Western society, because American psychology is the dominant force in the world, really finds its character as attempting to place the study of whatever, okay, mind, behavior, consciousness, cognition, psyche, self, whatever it is, that's the reference point in the context of the modern empirical natural science enterprise. That's what it's trying to do, both methodologically and ontologically. That's its identity. It's like, okay, hey, Newtonian matter in motion explodes across the scene. And then we start to get chemistry organized, and then biology and genetics and cell theory and Darwin natural selection. And that's really, and then you get Helmholtz doing his kind of thing. This is mid 19th century. And then from 1850 to 1900s, you see the birth of the institution of psychology in the academy. And the struggle then is to then, the challenge is to then, what is it and how does it relate as a science? What fundamentally is it as a science? Okay. And then by the turn of the 20th century, you have the problem of psychology. Which Lev Vygotsky in 1927 and other people before him delineate as the crisis of psychology. Okay, the crisis or the problem is that there is no coherent, comprehensive frame for the subject matter. Okay, which is the problem of the referent. What is the science of psychology about? Okay, and then how do you actually frame that referent? And what you get is a multiplicity of different paradigms or schools of thought. Really, no true paradigm wins the day. Like Newton wins the day in physics.
Right. And then there's at least a resting point. Like
then there's a resting point of matter and in motion, matter in motion via the laws of Newton and the calculus of Newton, consolidated on, one dimension of time, 3 dimensions of space. There are mechanical laws of action that then can be calculated across time and acceleration through calculus. And then that all of a sudden now it's like, oh, that's an epicenter of modern empirical natural science on explaining the behavior of matter and motion. That for 200 years, everybody was like, oh, we figured this fucking thing out. It's so powerful and so comprehensive that it's basically, you can't deny it. And then until the 20th century then underneath the dimension of matter, in the language you talk, underneath is an energy information non-local field thing.
Okay.
That quantum field theory and general relativity show the 1 dimension of time and 3 dimensions of space and an absolute frame of reference doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And those are emergent properties out of some other thing that's beneath matter. And then that blew up Newton. And so you then get quantum field theory, general relativity, black hole thermodynamics, whatever. And you get all of the modern physics revolution, and you have this sort of like conglomeration of paradigms, really most notably quantum field theory and general relativity, that says, and we don't have string theory or loop quantum gravity or whatever. It's like, okay, I don't really know what the ultimate paradigm is, but those 2 paradigms reside under and give rise to, we can think about the Newtonian matter paradigm as an emergent property out of this more fundamental thing that we see in Big Bang and quantum field theory. That's the, and by the way, in tree of knowledge, those are the 2 points. You drop down into quantum and back into bang. Okay. If you know the tree of knowledge picture, okay.
I'm learning it. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the matter, life, mind set of cones.
Oh, right.
That grow out. And then the farthest back point, if you go back in time, you drop into the pure energy information state of the Big Bang, which basically used to be thought of in terms of a singularity, although that was always just a mathematical term,
right,
rather than a real physical referent. But you get whatever it is, however we describe it, that was unbelievably hot, unbelievably dense, energy space-time field shit collapsed, and then it expanded, inflated, Big Banged itself out into what we now experience as the 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time and a macroscopic matter field. And that's the first cone then is the emergence of that, the emergence of matter as a particular dimension of complexification.
Oh, that's cool. So you start prior to matter.
Prior to matter.
That's great. Yeah.
And that's, by the way, is all part of the metaphysics of the Enlightenment problem, is because they thought it reduced to mechanical matter.
Right. That's why I said that. I was like, oh, you're saying there's something like more fundamental than matter, and so it's a mistake to put matter at the center, or even at
100%.
like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
The actual underlying ontological reference from a tree of knowledge / U-talk overall is an energy information field.
That's great. That's much more dynamic and much more like participatory, and like Schrodinger's cat and stuff like that.
Totally. Well, it accounts for all. Well, at least it's a simplistic ontology that accounts for all of that, or it doesn't commit to something that's wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't contradict it. Yeah,
doesn't contradict it. And if you get into this whole like, hey, are you like I don't know if you know Bernardo Kastrop's work or
a little bit. Yeah.
That's like have this matter versus idealism. That goes all the way back, of course, to Plato versus Aristotle.
Yeah, every generation has that.
Every generation.
Nominalist, realists, and
totally. My argument is that the Enlightenment gave us Newtonian matter and motion ontology, the mechanics, and a Kantian epistemology.
Right.
Okay.
I see that.
And no one then, you get Hegel and some of the synthetic big picture people, but none of the synthetic big picture people afford us a conciliant, coherent alignment that gives a genuine descriptive metaphysics of the physical world and the knower in proper dynamic relation. Nobody does that, and so the tree of knowledge then gives the proper big history picture that we grew really in you couldn't do it before our understanding of Big Bang and quantum field theory.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting about this, is because it's not like we were missing something. It's like we actually have these new tools to properly reevaluate and
we
say,
nobody's, and in fact, you could track this in philosophy. Nobody really is a materialist anymore. They're technically physicalists. And what
that's some of the confusion, right? Like this schizophrenia.
Right. What they mean by physicalist is actually you can't justify the reduction to matter because energy underneath. Most physicists would say, well, beneath matter is some kind of energy field that is non-local and non-spatial temporal, at least in the ways in which we understand.
Yeah, from our perspective. Yeah.
It doesn't work. So matter in motion is nobody's a mechanical. So there was a guy like Laplace who basically was. He's everything is these little tiny billiard balls that if you knew exactly their position and momentum at any particular time, because every one of them does what it does based on necessary and sufficient causation at the foundational level of atomic being, then if that were the case, then the argument is that the universe is inevitably determined. It's already happening in a particular way, because the unfolding of these billiard balls at whatever microscopic space-time field system that Newton said would just basically go infinite, but would still nonetheless be absolute. If you have that, then we're all a bunch of billiard balls.
Right. There's then everything, if I'm using this word right, like becomes like epiphenomenon, and my thoughts
everything is just sort of an inevitable. It's already it's a function of mechanical, predetermined, necessary, sufficient causation at whatever the fundamental root of cause is. That's the and then you realize, oh my God, no. There's actually entanglement. There's energy information entanglement across different domains that is happening in a trans-deterministic way, but not a reductively mechanistic deterministic way, meaning different levels are reaching across time in their specifications of space-time, most notably by Planck's constant, that create basically either or digits, that don't drop into a continua, that then because of their either or on superposition, they live both in a place, not in a place, both and in both places simultaneously in a superposition of uncertainty.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You could never determine what it is, until you actually then interact with it, and then you look, and then's where it is. But before then, it's a superposition, and somebody else is looking. So you get this quantum field state, which is not a traditional logic either or. It's either there or there. It's actually both and neither. And so the entire logical structure that would insist that these particle field entities have specification on space-time across an infinite thing don't. It blurs out. And then it blurs out into a indeterminate structure. And then that indeterminate structure across the chaos fields levels gives rise to a totally different metaphysical picture of the world. And to me, it's an energy information field theory that basically then gives rise to a matter in motion conglomerate that does have all this lawful stuff at a macroscopic level. And then you get, then you get life, matter, mind, and cultural structures. But the ultimate metaphysics as a non-local energy information field is in some ways a lot more like a mind, although not like in Bernardo Castro. I think Bernardo Castro.
Right, not like a planning mind.
Not like any kind of planning mind,
Right.
anything that we reference as normally, but in terms of its fundamental architectural structure, a non-local energy information field. More like a, when Descartes like, oh, I think, and it's not really here, it's not there, it's kind of informational or whatever you would say, versus these billiard ball matter in motion. It turns out that underneath the billiard ball matter in motion is this weird energy information non-local field. And that's fascinating. And that's part of the Enlightenment confusion, is like, because once you drop into the universe being the physicalist universe being an energy information field, certainly for me, then the idea of a mind as an energy information field, which is basically the way I describe
which is metabolic and aware, right? Like
it's
that's
a metabolic, right? You have the substance is energy, and its form is information, and you get then you have access to that substance information all the way back down, and then all the way up, and so you get monism, but you get a differentiated property monism. That affords clarity about the properties that this mental energy information field has nested in the dimensions of complexification without any of the old problems that if you say, oh, well, when you bottom out reductionistly, you get these little mechanical balls bouncing around. No, you get an energy information field. If you bottom that out to the bottom and you go back up to the top, that's what the tree of knowledge is no, I don't have any problem. There's no longer all of the confusions that split our Newtonian ontology, matter and motion ontology, and to know about it in a category of human mind way, Kantian epistemology. I can now build my knower mind as an energy information field out of an emergent matter, life, mind, culture energy information field, specifying both the proper continuity and with the tree of knowledge structure, the proper discontinuity, okay? Because it says life, mind, and culture actually are organized not so much by the energy, but they're organized by the layering of information.
That's I love. Do you ever read Alicia Juarrero's systems theory book, Dynamic Systems in Action?
Yeah.
So this sounds like her. Yeah, exactly. I've got it as well. Yeah, and the idea that like different higher levels emerge through the lower level kind of interactivity, like almost like willful interactivity, and then they have reciprocal downward positive pressures, and then new like agency emerges.
Right. And the way they do that is because they build epistemic systems and information processing systems, essentially, that then track the exterior forms. Okay, so you have a semantic whatever schema. A cell will have a schema for this kind of molecule. Okay, right. Patterning of this kind of molecule, which indicates this is food over here. Okay, and it has a patterning for this is toxic. Okay, right. So cells coming on, it's got its sensory detections. Now, what it does is it picks up the abstract form of this waves that this food is sending out and this toxin is sending out. Right.
Okay? Which they do, and they turn things off and turn things on and change all the time.
But what's interesting about it means that it's picking up the macroscopic form, the property aggregate of this particular food, and the property aggregate of this particular toxin. And then informationally interpreting the property aggregates, and then is behaving as a function of the way it interprets property aggregates. The reason that's important is because now the behavior of the epistemic functioner is now determined by the macroscopic form.
Oh, right. It's not just in itself, it's in the world. It's all this, like the real forms are informing the being. Yeah, and right. Wow.
So this is an epistemic form that gives rise to then functional behavior. Okay.
Right. And so like it rewards certain like behaviors.
And then it rewards and perpetuates it. But what's super interesting is if that's the case, if this thing is operated on the macroscopic function,
Yeah, yeah.
It means the microscopic causation here is irrelevant.
Right, because in Harara's, you want to be at the level that matters. You don't want to just be at all the levels. You want to be at the one that's relevant, to use John's language.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you operate based on your epistemic understanding of the relevance information, which is a macroscopic form, which means that the microscopic organization, the entropic organization of this particular thing is irrelevant.
Right.
If that's the case, then that's why when you get these higher order new cones, you cannot possibly reduce them because the microscopic structure is irrelevant for the cause, which is generating the behavior of the macroscopic cells or animals or people. And the reason is because they're not operating on the microscopic causation. It's irrelevant. It's the interpretive macroscopic form that the information epistemic unit uses to make its judgments. And this is why physics, you can't reduce the behavior of a cell to physics, because its behavior is guided. The physics is always trying to get to the microscopic quantum fields and the idea that you could actually differentiate everything in relation. That's a necessary sufficient causation.
That's a category error
level. It's like, no, because actually epistemic form processing works at macroscopic property level, which you cannot by definition reduce to microscopic. And that's why the tree of knowledge shows these different dimensions of complexification.
Yeah, yeah.
And the argument is that these epistemic processes are orthogonal to the energy properties, meaning that they're functionally caused by a radically different set of dimensions. And that orthogonal thing is actually completely related to the relationship between real numbers in mathematics and imaginary numbers. Okay.
Imaginary numbers. They're not relevant anymore.
In the sense that actually what's organized here is the informational networking semantics, not the mechanical energy, but it's the informational network that then affords the capacity of interpretive structure.
Ooh,
and it is that's self-organizing. That's what gives rise to the autopoietic self-organizing systems. And that's why you cannot reduce the macroscopic semantic information processing structure to the microscopic physical states. So you have to understand self-organization, you have to understand the informational network structure as the whole, because it's structured to create a semantic meaning-making system that's an epistemic process that evolved out of matter, but now it operates on the matter in a macroscopic way. Okay, and then it bases its informational decision on macroscopic properties that it processes information based on. So you're fucked. You would never be able to. The physics you could never reduce that to physical causation. You have to have physical causation in a nested hierarchical complexification of energy information processing, where what becomes salient or what becomes causal is the structure of information processing rather than the structure of mechanical energy transfer. And so that's what the tree of knowledge at least says as to why sometimes I used to use the word strong emergence. John didn't like that. But I would just say informational dimensional emergence, which is why it's not just one cone of complexification, but it's a multiplicity. There are four different cones.
Because you're capturing the qualitative shifts as they emerge.
Capturing the qualitative shifts. There are different kinds of shifts. There are shifts within matter.
Yeah, they're not just a shift and like a generic mechanical shift. These are like, boom, totally new realm. Boom,
totally new realm.
And so, that's awesome. Yeah. And so it's very Neoplatonic as well, because they don't denigrate the bottom levels. They just don't get obsessed with them the way a mechanical.
Well, because to understand it's the intelligibility dynamic, which is an abstraction of the forms, which the forms create the proper relationship between the information processors and the energy patterns themselves. And if you orient towards, this is why I'm becoming more Neoplatonic. So before I was Aristotelian in relationship to, I would track the functional dimensions across the vegetative, animal, rational human layers. And I would argue that actually depends on how strong you interpret the existence of forms. So if you interpret the existence of forms ontologically and a priori to the existence of the universe, then you're in danger. Then you're a Platonist in a way that I'm not.
Okay, good. Yeah, I don't like that. That confuses me as well, and it doesn't really help me like understand things when I like you don't want to be empirical, but you don't want to be a priori either. That's
Right.
like this kind of conundrum that people fall into.
So my argument is that if we start with energy information, okay, energy is the one, information is the differentiated relations within the information energy field. Okay?
Yeah, and it's real information. It's not just like random trivial stuff.
Each one of the photons can be thought of as a digit. Okay, each photon is a digit making up a continuum of energy. The whole is energy. Each boson or photon, whatever language you want to actually use, but I'll just use photon. It's a little more simple if you, depending on how familiar you are with integer spin entities. Anyway, you get a photon. A photon's a fundamental digit. Okay, and it lives inside of a field, but it has an entity specification. You can hone in on it, and the honing in on it means that there's information differentiation between the entity and the field that would be potentially detectable by some knower, by some measurer, by some observer. Okay. And then what happens is that as we get into epistemic creatures at the level of living, the defining feature of a life is that it actually has an epistemic processing capacity. In fact, Macmillan, the most recent voices actually expressed, hey, I think that living creatures are epistemically organized. Their fundamental feature is that they're an epistemic system, meaning that the way they self-organize is they track energy, matter, information forms, and they utilize that to be structurally self-dynamic autopoietic systems.
Yeah.
That's exactly what the tree of knowledge also says. It's an epistemic, meaning the system detects and knows and remembers and then utilizes that to invest behavior, energy, effort to maintain its negentropic, self-organizing, autopoietic, dynamic relation in the world. Okay.
Right. And then virtue, like epistemics even matter, like being good and collaborating.
Well, then the system has to know what's accurate and useful inside in order to behave appropriately. And you get then life behavior out of that. And then you get animal mental behavior out of that. And you get culture person behavior. The reason you get these jumps, the first jump is because the RNA, DNA, the DNA coding information, obviously you get RNA world, then you get, God only knows exactly the lipid structure, whatever it is that gives rise to the fundamental feedback jump. But you get this capacity then to process information. And then that capacity to process information has behavioral consequences. Epistemic, it's through epistemic and the epistemic causation, the process of behaving because okay, is that's the qualitative shift in living systems. And then animals behave through knowing, through the neurobehavioral mediated mechanism, which sucks together all of your somatic biological processes and creates a representation of that whole. So just as biology is creating a representation of the chemophysical whole, then the neurosystem is creating a representation of the organism-environment relation as a whole in the language of the nervous system as a new higher order language processor on top of that. And then that gets consolidated into sentience. And that's a good question exactly how, but it gives rise to the epistemic portal, originally around pleasure and pain, if you use John and my discussion of valence qualia. And that gives like 0.3 of a second to 3 seconds of a broadcast function in animals, maybe all the way down to insects, but certainly fish. And then with a mammal, you get the adverbial adjectival consciousness mind's eye structure that goes from 0.3 of a second, from 3 seconds to 20 seconds, working memory. So now you get a conscious mind's eye field that's present in your dog. And then we humans, through our hominid line, then create perspectival shifting in the relational way of the influence matrix map. So not only do I have animal environment minding, I can do animal other environment.
Right.
Creates the intersubjective field capacities of perspectival shifting. So I can take your perspective, I can take a general perspective. And then we are great apes and dogs and other social mammals can do the sum, but we jumped qualitatively out of the space to do that. And then that set the stage for this entire other information processing. First, symbolic tagging in a shared intersubjective space, and then symbolic syntactical tagging, which gives rise to propositions. And then my primary insight into this entire space was that if you have propositions, they make truth claims that then open up the problem of questioning. You open up the problem of questioning, you get the problem of justification.
Oh, wow.
Legitimize what it is that you're doing. And the problem of legitimizing and answering, asking questions that you then either answer to legitimize about what's accurate and good privately and collectively, then that explodes into the construction then of propositional networks as systems of justification that legitimize us and set the stage for us to go from primates to persons that then can operate on the culture person plane of existence. And that's a whole nother information layer. So my dog wanders around here, right? But he has no capacity for the semantic, intersubjective, linguistic, propositional networking shit. You, however, even though my dog and I spend a lot of time together, he hears me all the time, you and I never meet, and I just jump in and you have language access that windows you epistemologically into the propositional network. I have the exact same language. We both speak English, and we both have networks of propositions, and we start doing question answer dialogue to build a shared meaning making system.
That's great because like you can be like a simple mammal and probably avoid a lot of this problem, right? But you're just born into it and live in it, so it doesn't even really make sense to make that statement. But like a bear and a tiger could kind of know another. Like there's little examples of some things, but then they don't ever go to, like you said, the symbolic, semantic, representational ability that we have, and you know, understanding agriculture and turning that stuff into patterns and sharing the patterns, and like you said, the wanting to question isn't some universal, it's a reaction to our actual situatedness.
Right. And if you notice questions, the argument is that propositions create positive meaning spaces. That's actually a definition of what a proposition is. It's a meaning making claim.
Okay.
That's what a proposition is. So it's yoke stuff together. So you get antelope there is not a proposition. Okay. Unless you translate it into there are the antelope.
Yeah, so you can do like kind of pointing hunter-gatherer things.
Totally.
And that's really not at that cultural level yet.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that really clarifies some things.
So once you say there are the antelope, okay, now you have organized us and drawn our attention and made a truth claim about the state of affairs, obviously, and you imply then what we ought to be doing in relation. That's implied by drawing our investment and attention to there are the antelope. Okay. You create a truth propositional claim that says that now creates a potential correspondence. No, those are not antelope and they are not over there. Okay. That's now you can contrast that now. And then you could, why are we paying attention to antelope instead of rabbits or instead of berries? Okay. And then with that, you can then say, well, okay. What's happening is that we're creating a positive, and then you can think about questions as cognitive gadgets that point to potential negative spaces around the proposition.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Why, what, when, who, where. Notice how easy those are.
And they're all opening up.
And they just open up the potential negative space.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is like this edge of reciprocal opening and closing and all this other stuff. It's all this unbelievably complicated dynamic edge. That's why I always talk about question answer dynamics, because it's sort of the answers are propositions and then the questions are the negative spaces that are quickly available.
Oh, wow.
To open up in relation. And now to coordinate though, we have to have the networks of propositions that give us meaning that is up to the task to getting us to understand what is and ought. And capital C culture are the systems of justification, the interlocking networks of proposition that allow us to have a shared sense of is and ought propositionally. This is the case and you ought to do that. And that is
which gives us a control structure to actually like do culture, because now we can both state positive things, but open it up when we need to. And then it's really dynamic and individualistic and can situate itself into like different spots flexibly. 100%. And oh, that's so. Why don't you always say it like that, Greg? That sounds so clear this time. Like it's
I say this lots of different ways, and I don't even know where the hell. Sometimes it comes look a lot clearer than others. That's for sure.
Well, I think it takes like some effort to really appreciate so many of the little pieces. They're such a both technical and profound. And like there's like these simplicities to them too. You feel like you're getting something, you're like not. So it's this very your system is very powerful, right? And
well, one of my favorite responses ever was when I reached out to Dan Dennett.
okay, yeah.
And you know, this was when I was like, so this is 1998. And Consilience had come out in 1998. And Dan Dennett had done, you know, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. And I found the Tree of Knowledge in 1997. Okay. And had been working on it maybe for 2 years. I think this is 1999 when I was definitely at the University of Pennsylvania, Virginia, because I remember the office I was in. And I was reaching out. I sent shit to Stephen Hawking and Richard Dawkins and Steve Pinker and Dan Dennett. I never heard from Dawkins or Hawking. I knew I'd never heard from Hawking. But you know, I had and I heard from E.O. Wilson. My dad offered E.O. Wilson $1,000 to spend 1 hour with me.
Awesome.
For Christmas. That was a Christmas gift my dad gave me. And E.O. Wilson wrote back and said, I'll look at it when it's in print, because I had actually not published it yet. And then in 2007-8, I published a special issue called, you know, The Problem of Psychology and Integration of Human Knowledge, contrasting Wilson's consilience to the Tree of Knowledge system. I sent that to him, but he never wrote back.
Oh.
You know, obviously I was an arrogant little, you know, genius graduate student.
No, I wouldn't say that's arrogant. I think that's
whatever.
Eager. I think you're excited. And
I was eager. I knew that I was onto something.
Yeah,
to get to the punchline of this is, so when I wrote Dan Dennett and showed him the Tree of Knowledge, he wrote a 1-word email reply that says, "Thank you, Greg." Wait, so the whole thing. Well, I have one. And he said, "I have 1 word for the Tree of Knowledge, and that's unsurprising." That's what he said.
And is that a dismissive unsurprising or it's affirming unsurprising?
No, it's totally. And that was the last I heard of him. So then I went back and said, I wrote like this 1.5-page thing. But the whole point of it is over and over, what I see is that people get all of the reactions that you are describing, and then it short circuits their capacity, to follow. It's common sense as shit.
Well,
so you're telling me we go from rocks to plants to animals to people? Didn't fucking Aristotle do that? I mean, isn't that just fucking great chain of being? You know?
Well, that's the problem of like novelty seeking in science. It should be truth seeking, not novelty seeking. And like they rewards like wow rather than affirming simple things. And
so people like everyone already knows this. It's unsurprising, right? That's one reaction. And then it's this network of unbelievable detail. Like when you really get into it, you have to then learn. And then there are all these nuanced insights that people miss that I have actually discovered, because I am a creative genius and I can actually find shit and then fill it in and then organize it in relation. So you get this entire weird system that's both common sense at one level, makes perfect sense out of what a lot of other people are doing, and then also has all this novelty and specificity built into it that kind of like, unless your ego is really like, hey, I just want to learn this because I think it makes sense. But if you're like, a lot of people are like, oh my God, I'm going to fall into this and I'm going to lose myself. You know, it's like, what the fuck is this thing? And then any established academic just runs away from it. I mean, that's my experience, is like the only people that I really get interested in it are people that are not established. They're not really, I mean, John's the one exception, really, in many ways.
Well, but he's like the other group, though. He's the group that wants the truth and not like publications and novelty.
And he's got, and he climbed up a unbelievably broad perspective through recursive relevance realization. So he has a meta theory, and thankfully his meta fucking theory sits like a key inside of a lock. You know, it's like I did weak neurocognitive functionalism, and now I have predictive processing into recursive relevance realization. Holy fucking shit.
Yeah. John gets the like, because he hates the pure computational model. So he's got to work that out a lot. And
so anyway, that's me jammering a lot.
No, that was excellent. That was like, I've never felt like I've understood your system so well, and especially contrasted to kind of like the mechanical, relativistic, Newtonian kind of stuff. So no, that was definitely not a waste, I would say, or indulgent or anything like that. I'm indulging. If anyone's indulging, it's
okay. Well, fair enough. I appreciate that. I'll take that. Anyway, it's great. I always love. I mean, it's been such a fascinating journey. You know, to be like, hey, I actually found this thing, and then to be like, everyone's like, huh, and then they're just sitting there. It's been fascinating. It's lovely.
Well, yeah, and you have this like first-person perspective, as well as it like lets you appreciate all the other third and first person perspectives from like a more sincere place, whereas someone else that's just kind of owning someone else's system and then goes like, oh, I don't like this new third thing. They can't, they're almost asked to sacrifice the old thing. Whereas you're like, and John like as well, like, hey, I love convergence. And that's what they taught me in graduate school, is like, you need to triangulate to learn, and triangulation outperforms like any logarithmic or linear model, where there's theory and intuition and old models and new models, and they're all
100%.
synergizing to help us accomplish things rather than like competing to like get you a tenure or something like that.
Totally. No, people get trapped in their system of justification,
Yeah.
and then they're actually operating based on investment and influence, really. In other words, they're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
maintain their investment influence structure.
Yeah, they're
Because-
bullshitting. They're bullshitting
Right,
like in
because
this
if
verbal.
not, then all of a sudden their system melts, and the thing that makes them important all of a sudden is no longer grounded in their identity. So that's
Yeah.
what they're trying to protect egoically. It's like, oh my God,
Exactly.
I need this. And if all of a sudden this system comes along, could just absorb it and do all the things I've defined myself against to create my territory that I'm trying to defend and justify, it's like, oh my God, then this is obviously better, includes what I have to offer, and then synergizes with everybody else. My entire differentiated identity dissipates.
Mhm.
And then I found myself in the absent ground of justification and influence and investment. And that's a very bad state for the ego. The ego don't like that at all. So,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
and I
it's
took
too
a cross-cultural psychology class, and like they had like this great paper where like when two cultures interact, you can kind of bow down where one just wins, or you can sidestep it, or you can assimilate it, right? Like if that's, I think, what people want to be doing with a good thing, is going like, ooh, how can I let this interpenetrate me and we both win, or at least I'm winning. You can even do it very selfishly, but the threateningness of it makes a lot of sense, because they're just like, oh, who is this colonial? Is he gonna try and take over here, or make me irrelevant? I think there's also some of that, like old robots. You ever watch the sci-fi movies where like
Sure.
the old robots don't work well and they kind of become irrelevant to the whole society?
That's exactly
So,
right. The enthusiastically good news about all of this, if we can actually get out of these dynamics, is that there's a way to suck up so many useful partial truths.
Well, that's what
harmonize
Platonism
them.
does. Yeah.
So, I agree. And it does it so we can make music out of the chaotic fragmented noise, and then give everybody, a sense of their note in relationship to the larger whole, and generate harmony. There is a real way that can
Right.
happen.
Which is
see
humbler, right? Like if we all just take our small part, then we can all be
Mhm.
part of a dynamic harmony, rather than this chaotic disharmony that the sciences are just kind of in right now. And
Right.
and then it just is so. And I liked also, you talked about kind of, I think during that Stoa talk, kind of a small pluralism within even religious systems, and within like so where practices can come from other traditions without being relativistic, or without like denying the uniqueness within the individual systems, and those kind of things. So, which is very what did you say in episode 3 or 4, the Star Wars ethics?
Right. So, well, there's a couple things. Yes. So I'm advocating for what I would call a coherent integrated pluralism.
Right. Okay.
Okay. That, in other words, there is music that you can extract, you can engage in recursive relevance realization transjectively, see it coherently, and have a multiplicity of different parts that are organized in a functional whole. That's integration. Okay. So there's a coherent, and it's pluralistic in the sense that you can aspectualize and position yourself in relation to essentially an infinite number of places. Okay, so you can stand in relationship to whatever the referent point here across an infinite number, and aspectualize aspects of the referent point through a whole bunch of different ways. So this is when you get into John's eidetic recent work, where he's like, from this from Platonic perspective, there's an infinite number of aspectualized places, but there is something that holds the structure together as a whole. Okay, that is the through line between the aspectualized elements. So the aspectualized positional elements is a pluralism. You stand in a number of different places in relation, but the through line is the coherent center that integrates. Okay, and so that's the entire metaphor of what I call the elephant sun god. Okay, is there is a coherence to the light of goodness, truth, and beauty at some level. There's a
Mhm.
eudaimonic ultimate concern endpoint.
Right, that transcends all these little absolutes that are kind of in the plural.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That transcends it. And it's the elephant, okay, which is then from the Indian metaphor or parable of the blind men and the elephant that's then made up, where blind men will grab a hold of a part of it, okay, see the partial truth at the level of grab a hold of the leg and call it a trunk of a tree. Oh, an elephant's like a trunk tree, and somebody grabs its tail and says it's like a rope. Somebody grabs the trunk of the elephant and says it's like a snake. Okay, so those are partial forms that hold on to the truth. Those are blind partial truths. A coherent integrated element affords this capacity to see the whole, but it is also the case that you may want to still maintain contact with the trunk or the leg or the side predominantly. Okay. And that would be the part that you ideographically or your group aspectualizes and honors as sacred. Okay.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I see. So I see how you're kind of pulling that off. Yeah.
So for me, I see the elephant sun god through the garden. So the garden, Utah's garden, sits underneath the sun from a particular perspective. Okay. And it says, I worship the sun god through being that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity. Those are my big three values.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Those are how I try to align my baton of energy information across the arc of being, is being that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity. That's not the only, way to, embrace and honor the elephant sun god. You could honor it with love or human freedom or any number of particular kinds of, or just the great transcendence of goodness, truth, and beauty in whatever way in which you will move away from evil. There are lots of different ways that you could honor that ultimate concern and see the sun from many perspectives. You can see the sun from a wide variety of different perspectives. So the garden looks at the sun god through a particular lens, and it would invite other wisdom traditions and just situate itself as one position of a sage in relationship to a multiplicity of possible sages that are spectralizing good through, or with the sun god icon through all sorts of different levels. And there's a coherence, there's a pluralism, there's an integration.
Yeah, and the species problem, right, is we never wanted to go past like the one leader, and we just want that one perspective. It's like, oh, as long as we're just all A, then it doesn't matter. But as soon as we see that there's two different kinds of A's, our absolutism is like our mind is blown, and we're just in this struggle. Yeah, and then you're trying to kind of like put Humpty Dumpty back together again and say, look,
through a dialectical perspectivalism that also is coherent.
Yeah. The dialectic part is really subtle and lost in the scientific worldview too, right? Because it's this, there's a good thesis that someone did, I think, on Erigena, that was saying like the mind actually can't exist without a dialectic. Like it's actually just a dialectical system. And if you personify it as like a cycloptic system, or too much of just like a will that doesn't have a backwards to it or isn't doing the dance, then you're just like malfunctioning.
Right. And I would say certainly in terms of the, many of the natural scientists, big picture people, okay, they drop into a natural science epistemology and just work from there. I mean, like A.O. Wilson or Sean Carroll, okay?
Right.
And what that just affords them is a natural science metaphysics, okay, which the whole point of talk and the problem of psychology is that the natural science metaphysics that comes out of the Enlightenment and gives rise to the scientific worldview, okay, is broken in its capacity to give us the proper relationship between matter and mind. It has it's got no descriptive, there is no descriptive metaphysical big picture that affords us a natural science view that also incorporates the complexities of what is meant by mind. They don't know how to do that. That is why that's why the entire problem of psychology emerged. Okay, because science happened, and then in the 1800s, 19th century, all the scientists, people were science minded and were like, I'm going to try to build a science of psychology. Okay. And you could do a science of biology, and you could even do a science of neuroscience. Okay. But once you got to, and even animal behavior, you could do ethology. But once you got to psychology, whatever that fucking word meant,
culture, right? Once you get to like this really cultural
Right. Well, people didn't. The whole point is that actually they didn't know when it started and when it. So actually, in some references for it starts at animal clearly. Okay, and some references just are human for psychology. Some references are for behavior that we watch, functional adaptive behavior. Some are only for the inside psyche. Okay, so it all depends on what your reference is for the thing. That's and what you then see is all these schools of thought that epicenter the referent in totally different ways. So behaviorism epicenters the referent of classical behaviorism with a stimulus response relation. So the reference of what is psychology? It's stimulus response relations that we can observe and experimentally analyze. That's what Watson's psychology is.
Right. No, I'm very familiar with the cognitive, precognitive, behavioralist.
Right. Well, so you get the behavioral lineage.
And the Gestaltist split, that's like a big problem, is because like I think they were in the German camp and something, I forget what happened in the 40s, but like we stopped liking the Germans for a while. And then a lot of our Gestalt literature just disappeared.
Well, there was all of this potential cognitive literature, Ebbinghaus and
I've read a lot
Donders and all of the early experimental cognitive people, which would have been experimental cognitive. They then, they come back with the cognitive revolution. And the Gestaltists are sort of in there, but a
little bit. I mean, they're not unappreciated.
I mean, but the point fundamentally is that there's no descriptive metaphysical system that anyone can come along.
Because naturalism doesn't want that, right? Like, isn't that like a metaphysics is like creepy to naturalists?
Well, naturalism, I mean, it's yes. Well, it depends. Okay. So I think the answer is now the concept of metaphysics makes naturalists go crazy, but that's an error of their history.
That's better said than what I was thinking.
And you see this in like Jim Rutt. If you hear, I mean, I was talking to Jim Rutt, and my thing is that, and I was like, well, I'm working on kind of the metaphysics of this. He's like, somebody says metaphysics, and I reach for my gun. Okay.
Well, John's good about pulling back when he senses that, right? Because
totally. And what I told Jim is like, I was actually trained as a behavioral science, Jim, and I learned that because I learned that you're supposed to ground it in empiricism and logic. And I didn't know that actually that entire project is properly construed as descriptive metaphysics. Okay. What I thought metaphysics was pure metaphysics. Like shit that just doesn't have any reference to empirical, because I learned that empirical was defined against metaphysics.
Right. Okay? It's positive. Empirical is positive. And this
empirical
is like
positive, and metaphysics is just a bunch of concepts that are attached to nothing. Well, pure metaphysics, but descriptive metaphysics references and organizes the empirical. That's what descriptive metaphysics
they're dialectic
does.
Between these
They're
two.
Dialectic, which by the way, the center flower there is the metaphysical empirical dialectic. That's what it's a picture of. That's the fundamental idea in the tree of life behind me is an appropriate dialectical relationship between metaphysics and empiricism.
Yeah, and then you're giving an inner world to beings when you do that, like which you need as a psychologist.
You open up the space. Well, so you have to open. This is what the fucking problem was. So empirical means two totally different things. Okay, empirical initially meant observation, first person.
Right.
Okay.
Galen,
so it's empirically the case that I am experiencing my holding this coin.
Okay.
I'm observing that I'm holding this coin. It's coming through my senses, and it is apparent to me. I open my eyes.
Right. It's just actual observation. It's like I can empirically talk about the mall or the traffic or the weather.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's actually the referent there is first person observation. You're seeing this coin. I'm seeing this coin. Okay.
Right. And when you abstract out away the person, then you get into this conundrum.
Well, then you get third person scientific systematic empiricism, where the idea of scientific empiricism is that your particular phenomenology is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I'm factoring you out by experiment, logic, and deductive analysis, abductive reasoning, which is basically like this is the best explanation.
Yep, I know abduction.
Okay.
Because inference fails, so we have to deduce.
And so the reason the mall exists, has nothing to do with your qualitative experience. We can measure the mall's weight. We can crash things into the mall. We can, the mall, whatever, and it exists across all of these different ontological experimental things. And then we mathematically map that experimentally, and we say, hey, there are moles. Actually, moles are made up of atoms, like everything that's material, it's made up of atoms, and that's the ontology. And it doesn't matter what your fucking qualitative experience of being is or not. That's, we now deductively know, you know, and this, to put it this way, it doesn't, you can't see it. Okay, but we can experimentally analyze and deductively eliminate other explanations, and it's deductive logic and experimentation that gives rise to our observations that confirm our theories.
Right.
Notice subjective qualitative phenomenological first-person empiricism now is not only not the same, it's essentially eliminated as irrelevant.
Right, right. Which is why like the existentialists are so important, because they actually are trying to bring back the first person. And
right. And now ask psychology to build, let's see what this now is our conundrum. We're going to build an exterior explanatory structure of behavior that completely eliminates or does not use as a referent subjective qualitative perception, when in fact, many people want to use the science to explain what we mean by subjective qualitative.
Yeah, so there's just like a fundamental bad fit, the same
fundamental
way
bad
can't eat
fit.
arsenic to be strong.
Exactly, exactly. And the UTOC figured that out with the tree of knowledge, giving us the tree of the matter, life, mind, a new big history scientifically. And then ultimately the whole UTOC then has the coin, which serves as the proper placeholder for the psyche. So the psyche then is the unique idiographic, particular subjective qualitative experience of being.
Yeah, why do you say idiographic? I hear you say it all the time. And why is that like an important semantic thing to think about?
Because idiographic refers to the particular, unique, specific. Okay. Versus the generalizable causal. Okay. So the difference here is this. Okay. So the difference.
Why not just say like agent or something like that?
Because the point of it is what constitutes it is its unique, contingent, particular history.
Okay, so when you say that, you mean that. Okay.
Okay. Put it this way. So if we, you've seen like the lottery, obviously the little balls that everybody does drop the ball in, and the nomenclatic explanation for that. Okay, the nomenclatic explanation for the lottery is, hey, fill your balls, do ping pong balls behave this way, and if you add air to it, okay, and you attach them thing, and we can basically, although we can't predict exactly what's going on, we can lawfully state air pressure, momentum, etc. That explains the behavior of those balls.
Yeah, we have these ideals that we've learned about, and
exactly. So that's the scientific explanation. There's a scientific explanation for why the balls do what they do. And then there's a local contingent history that gives rise to why 21, 64, and 88 pop up.
So history is almost like in the object rather than like.
Well, right. And so you have the lawful stuff and then the historical developmental path. John Locke talking about the law and the path.
Oh, great.
Okay, which is then the historical contingent. And the laws explain where the path is going. Okay. The psyche is constituted not by the laws or even by the path. The psyche is constituted by the fact that it's 21, 63, and 88. It is constituted by the idiographic error. From the psyche's perspective, all of what makes me unique is the fact that I'm specific. From the scientific nomenclatic perspective, all that specificity is error.
Right. No, I was thinking this earlier. Yeah, that's where I was thinking like that's where God is hiding, is in the error term of our models. Because like I've done so much psychrometrics, you would be bored by me if I started talking about them, and you seem to love this stuff. And like that error term is so interesting because it's not just like a weird E that's sitting there. It's where all the other variance gets dumped. And when you do all these really bad models that are all correlational, and even if some of the good ones, like there's truth in that error. It's not like mistake term, it's reality term that's unexplainable. And this is great. Yeah.
So for me, the epicenter of the psyche, okay, is constituted by the unique particular idiographic error.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. And that makes sense from the third person too, because then their model is still okay because the error is holding the real, but then like my real is their error.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Right. And what that does is that puts in proper relation the particular real idiographic epistemic vector of inside out, which is the psyche, versus the nomenthetic general outside in behavioral view, which is what science built. The epistemological structure of modern empirical natural science was to get this generalized view that's not dependent upon any particular unique error quality view. It's dependent upon, we're going to find the generalized laws and then put them in motion.
Right, which makes it like stable across time and across individual and very powerful, but not like, I think Jordan Hall one time said, like, you keep rounding down and rounding off, you end up thinking something that's not true after long enough.
Exactly, 100%. So the position of the tree of knowledge is exactly opposite of the position that the coin represents. The position of the coin represents is me as Gregg sitting here talking to you as Robert. Okay, that makes valuable the unique setup that gave, like a lottery, okay, that gave the 216388, and now we value the 216388 as being, because it's real and contingent in here, me and you together.
Well, it's more relevant to us than the theory at the time.
Exactly. It's the real. Okay? From a theoretical perspective, we say, just like, well, why did that license plate drive by? It's like, well, there's no scientific, but the license plate is what's real.
Right.
And that's what matters to our psyches. So it's a complete inversion about the epistemics. There's an epistemics of the psyche is completely inverse to the epistemics of science. And that's a really, really important thing that people have missed. And the scientists then, this is why, consciousness and everything else is all this. It's a totally different language system that they basically can't figure out what to do with. And figured out, it's a variable that they tried to factor out. They tried to factor out the ideographic qualitative knower as error and pretend it didn't exist. Okay. When in fact, what they just should have said is, here's a circle of a variable. We need to place that variable in proper relation. That's a big difference in saying it doesn't exist.
No, yeah. And I mean, like, I think I might have talked about this last time, but like, I met with like the historian of economic thought in the US, this guy at Duke, and like economics now can do really powerful things, but there was points in history where it was like, get precious metal or take over land or get more silk than gold and stuff like that. And it's just irrational from a very like functional, integrated, productive view, but it was powerful then. And it's like, it is evolved. Whereas psychology, unless you really like say it's an offshoot of philosophy and religion, it has no history. It's such a young child in the sciences. And, 100 years from now, people will look back and go like, like the people like Evan Thompson and Francisco Varela and you and John and people like that are going, we need to integrate biology and science and personhood and virtue to have and that's, I mean, do you think computers could be conscious given all the biological necessity of metabolizing and information?
Generally, certainly, I want to be clear about what I mean by the functional referent of consciousness.
Okay.
3 broad ones. Okay. So one is the most broad definition that people use is functional awareness and responsivity.
Mm-hmm.
And in that regard, it's another synonym for that is intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, both cells and computers are conscious. They exhibit functional awareness and responsivity from the outside.
Right.
That's what. So if you define consciousness as functional awareness and responsivity, the short answer is, of course, yes, they're actually already doing that. How the hell do they win a chess game? Okay.
Right. No. Yeah. There's a feedback loops they matter and they control things.
But really, then the right response there is, well, what do you really just mean adaptive intelligence then by that term? And the answer is, yeah, actually, that's what that term actually references. It's synonymous with adaptive intelligence. And of course, then there's artificial intelligence. I mean, by definition. So you're like, okay, well, is that really what I mean? And the answer is no, probably not. What you probably mean is the experience of being, the subjective experience of being conscious, the felt experience of pain, the hard problem of consciousness as the Chalmers people, sensory phenomenological consciousness as a referent. Okay. So, and you exhibit functional awareness and responsivity when you're asleep, you roll over. Okay. But you're a zombie inside in a deep sleep. Okay. And the idea that you can lose consciousness and still be breathing and your body's still doing functional awareness and responsivity, but you've
Oh,
lost
okay. So
consciousness.
there's intelligence, but not consciousness in an
Exactly.
unconscious
That's it.
person. Oh, that's
So now
great.
consciousness is the subjective experience of being. Okay. And that arises, as far as, from a naturalistic perspective, that arises somehow in the neurobiological stadium field structure of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That creates some kind of neurobiological information processing, information field structure. Okay. That somehow gets bound together. Okay.
Yeah.
Across a structural hierarchy, which I would say goes from animal, body into animal, animal into mammal, mammal into primate, and primate into person.
Okay.
Which creates then a hierarchical structure. This is the vertical architecture of the psyche. Okay. That at least in terms of, and then that is then the field, and the epicenter of that field is the subjective conscious experience of being.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if that's the case, and in that sense, no fucking way, or we're not anywhere near making machines
Okay. I love
conscious.
it.
We don't have no idea how to generate a mechanistic layering of that kind of process. And it almost certainly is so dependent upon the unbelievable complex architecture of organisms and then nervous systems of which we have no clue how to make happen. So what we did is we abstracted algorithmic processing, and we're utilizing that to build functionally aware and responsive entities, but they're zombies philosophically.
Yeah. No, computers are more like these salt exchanges.
They're
rather
salty.
than,
They're exactly. They're not. So they're
like a bear.
They're functional. They're functional response awareness. I mean, systems that we just. Oh yes, they have functional relation, but they're zombies, and they exhibit intelligence, but they do not exhibit what we really mean by the primary referent of consciousness, which in my language is called mind two, the domain of mind two, which is the subjective conscious experience of being, which is the epicenter of the psyche, by the way. So the epicenter of the psyche is synonymous. It is mind two.
And is that caring about things on some level, or?
Well, the evolutionary phylogenetic and I believe ontogenetic functional phenomenological architecture is exactly that. It emerges. What it's doing is it's binding. If you look at the architecture of the control system, it binds the exterior sense, which is the map that you have in predictive processing of what the world is. Okay. And then you have the interoception, which is the assessment that you have of your body state. Are you hungry? Are you hurt? Okay. And then you have the energized motion, which organizes the proprioception, which is your body movement, to make adjustments, okay, in relation. So outside, inside, adjust. Okay.
So you need those three things as a minimum.
Those three things. And those three things then come together and need to be coordinated in a participatory identity way. Okay, because you need to see what's outside, you need to see how you feel inside, you need to adjust, and you need to see what happens in relation. Okay? And the argument then is the valence qualia of pleasure and pain, okay, emerge to create a connection between all of those three domains.
Right, because that's the feedback system of go ahead and stop, and I like that and I don't like that. And then you can start having voting, right? You can start having like, okay, let's weigh the trade-offs. So 51 yeses, go. 51 no's, stop. And that it requires actually a big system of little feelers all kind of interacting.
Totally.
Oh, that's so excellent.
So you get valence qualia that gives you your jolt of pleasure and pain. And that happens at least with fish and maybe all the way down to insects or whatever.
I think so. I've seen like butterflies get afraid of me and stuff, and little creatures move towards honey.
The functional awareness. The problem is we just don't know. But I'm an ancient origin of consciousness, where consciousness is defined in relationship to the yoking together.
Oh, nice.
The evolution of the sensitive soul of Jablonka and Ginsburg, I think it is. The evolution of sensitive soul basically maps this all out. Came out in 2001.
Yeah.
And by sensitive, they're using Aristotle's core sensory motor connection that defines the animal mind. No, they do not mean that. They mean the fact that you sense and then move, and the yoking of sensing and moving together in a system that then affords this capacity. And the argument then is you get flashes of pleasure and pain, and then this then creates an integrated field that ultimately is going to give you adjectival and adverbial mind's eye.
And then you can transcend both, right? You can use even those as tools, and those are like ways to look through rather
Right.
than.
Well, then you have the
uh,
capacity for perspectival shifting at the primate.
Yeah.
And then you get a person that can then justify and then utilize logic to move it all around. And then you get this stacked hierarchy from animal to mammal to primate to person.
Uh-huh.
And then you ask the way the psyche actually is structurally organized. And you're like, oh, fuck, I can totally see those different layers. I can see their interrelations. I can make predictions about how they operate on time scales. And yeah, I think the architecture of psyche is nicely placed. I know you got to go for her.
No, that's not that. Yeah, thank you so much. What's maybe something fun or happy in your life besides all the serious conference building and all of these things? What's a lighter topic? Or are you just like John? John's always in the same.
Well, I'm like, this is my life. The really interesting thing over the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And it's good. But yeah, so I married my high school sweetheart.
Yeah.
And we have 3 wonderful kids. Our youngest just turned 18. And my obsession with U-Talk relative to my wife's world is such that we have decided over these last 3 months that it's best for us to mutually separate and go our different ways as the season of our relationship, basically is properly seen as coming to an end. And then in the context, shortly after we decided that, I then fell in love with somebody who loves U-Talk. And actually I went down and visited her in Brazil. And so now I've gone from loving my wife, which I still do as a person.
Of course, yeah.
In love of her, and she loves me. And then we had to realize that, and that was complicated. And then all of a sudden I accidentally backed into falling in love with somebody else. And then holy shit. And so anyway, my life in 2 months, I'm going to move to Charlottesville and move in with my new love from Brazil. And she's going to be here. And we'll spend all of our time building U-Talk because she sees it like I see it. And wants to spend her life devoted to it because she can't believe, for whatever reason, she can just see it so naturally, and she can't understand why the people in the world can't see this thing.
And she was ready for it.
She somehow, her structure was just sort of like, this makes perfect fucking sense. Why the hell the world's having a meaning in mental health crisis, and this guy figured this shit out, and why don't we help people see that this is what we should be investing in? So
oh wow,
so that's affirming to me, and the two of us then have hit it off. And so my life is, so I'm super happy. And literally yesterday she got her visa approved for a travel visa, so she can actually come up here, which was going to be a potential issue. It's a lot more complicated to get a travel visa than I realized. So we found that out yesterday, and that means that in 2 months instead of maybe 8 months. So in terms of what's happy in my life, I just discovered that my current love is going to be here potentially 6 months earlier than I thought.
Oh, that's beautiful.
How's that? If that doesn't activate the heart joy, I don't know what would. So my heart joy is filled with lots of that right now, because I'm still 24 hours after that glow.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, there's so much potential and reward and oh, that's so great. And yeah, it's got to be tough on some levels, but finding a new person that you gel with and that is at your level of maturity and appreciates you on these multiple levels. And yeah, I can relate to that a little. And even just friends I've had in the last 6 months, it's just like, oh, I feel at home now in my relationships. And so, I have this whole part of me. I can feel my heart again and stuff.
That's exactly right. So, because when my wife and I would talk, it's like, oh, what'd you do at a You Talking with Gregg session? Like, I hope it went well. It's like, it's like, what are you interested in? It's like, oh, I hope that's okay. And then you talk with other people like, oh my God, this is like this. It's like, oh my God, I'm just like, this is what my life is. And
and you're not a small talker, I get. So
so anyway, that's what's happy in my life right now.
Well, that's awesome, Gregg. And last thing I'll say is just thanks for making the time and helping me become more intelligible in my world. And
it fills my heart. So.
All right. Well, I'll see you on the forum and see you around.
We'll be in touch.
All right. Take care, Gregg. Great to see you.